Something inside me died when I started losing the very things that brought me here, including the support I thought I had. Your people have lost colleagues, culture, mission, security, and purpose. Yet they're expected to remain engaged with the very system that created their loss and to immediately just get back to work as if nothing happened. You're mourning the death of something while still having to show up for it. People aren't resisting the future, they are mourning the past. You bring in change management consultants to address resistance when people are actually grieving. Have you ever had someone on your team say, "Something inside me died" after big change happened at work? Or maybe you've been noticing your employees and leaders disengage, take more time off, becoming more cynical. It might be organizational grief and burnout. And knowing what it looks like could change how you lead others through change. Welcome to the Hard Skills. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, and for the next few episodes, I'll take a deeper dive look at organizational change from a very different perspective. The prolonged, unresolved psychological grief that happens during restructures, layoffs, and major transitions, and why traditional change management completely misses how to appropriately address it. In our previous bonus series, we looked at burnout, which definitely can contribute. So in this series, I'll add another layer: organizational ambiguous grief in the workplace and what it looks like. I was initially inspired to think about ambiguous grief in Leslie Poston's Cyberspace podcast episode on sneaky grief and how we don't acknowledge certain kinds of grief in our society. I loved that episode. It made me think about all the leaders I work with now who have experienced the impact of restructuring, loss of programs they've stood up, including those that connect to their sense of purpose and identity, like DE&I programs, RIFs, and more. I wrote about it in my Psychology Today blog series in an article I called "When Workplace Upheaval Turns into Unresolved Grief," and people resonated so much with it, I decided to turn it into a 3-part podcast series to explain more about how to separate similar ideas like this and then what you could do about it. So let's take one example. Maya, who, of course, on all my podcast episodes is a composite of several clients to protect anonymity. Okay. Maya is a mid-level leader in a global tech company. Her company restructured, and according to them, it was to streamline operations. But everyone could see what was really happening. They were quietly moving people out. For Maya, it was crystal clear that they were slowly pushing her out. And here's what made it more devastating. She had poured her heart and soul into this job. She had personally designed the entire strategy she hired to execute. When she reached out to me for help, her goal was straightforward. I want to show up authentically while demonstrating I can do this job. I want to show that I'm not affected by these changes, and I want to leave with my dignity. But I think about that impossible tension in that statement. How do you balance authenticity when you feel angry, shocked, confused, betrayed, and hurt? How do you demonstrate you're not affected when everything inside you is screaming that you are affected? And she told me something that really pulled at me. She said, "Something inside me died when I started losing the very things that brought me here, including the support I thought I had. I feel like I'm going through the motions in an organization I don't recognize anymore." That's not dramatic. That's not weak. That's grief. Yeah, grief. When companies restructure, merge, or betray employee trust, whether they realize it or not, entire workforces experience legitimate ambiguous grief. Your people have lost colleagues, culture, mission, security, and purpose. Yet they're expected to remain engaged with the very system that created their loss and to immediately just get back to work as if nothing happened. I mean, maybe it didn't impact the executive who isn't as close to it, of course, but organizations are made of people and people have lots of feelings about lots of things, right? And loss is a feeling that cuts deep. And the people more likely to be affected by it are mid-level leaders who were previously highly engaged and committed to the organization. They had hopes and dreams about their next steps in the organization. They had made strategic plans and goals for new initiatives and improvements. They had invested lots of time to develop their teams, and the restructures, cut funding, and other upheaval have taken all that away from them, leaving them wondering, do I still belong here? Am I still valued? Did I just lose my entire career or life for this? So this isn't traditional grief. It's what Dr. Pauline Boss calls ambiguous grief. She coined this term, ambiguous grief, which is a prolonged, unresolved freezing of the grief process. You're mourning the death of something while still having to show up for it. No funeral, no closure, just an open ended, unresolved loss. And unlike traditional grief, where you get closure, ambiguous grief creates chronic sorrow, feelings of helplessness, and degradation of people's usual coping mechanisms. And if you have women leaders on your team, leaders from marginalized backgrounds, they're probably carrying an extra burden if they have been experiencing the glass cliff phenomenon. What is the glass cliff phenomenon? Well, women are more likely to be promoted to leadership roles during times of crisis after everything else has been tried. They get handed the most challenging positions right when things are falling apart. Then they're expected to manage both the practical changes and the invisible emotional labor of caring for employees with constant compassion. And when things go wrong under such impossible conditions, women are judged more harshly than their male counterparts, but they're still expected to show up with empathy and compassion. So, client Maya wasn't just dealing with loss and losing her job and her vision. She was also dealing with the weight of having been set up to manage an impossible situation and now being blamed when it didn't work out. So, here's the real cost to your organization. When you don't acknowledge grief, you mislabel it. You call people resistant to change or disengaged or difficult. You make it about them being the problem of not accepting the change instead of acknowledging their very human experience. So let me tease apart what you're actually seeing, because these terms get used interchangeably when they really shouldn't be. And I'm going to describe the differences between organizational trauma or betrayal, ambiguous grief, disengagement, low morale, change resistance, job hugging, quiet quitting, absenteeism, and more. These terms are being thrown around, but some of these are symptoms, some are root causes, and some are behaviors. And when you know where they're coming from, right? What's the root cause? What's the behavior that comes after the root cause? You're going to have a better sense of what can help. So let's start with organizational trauma or betrayal. Dr. Jennifer Freyd coined this term. Institutional betrayal is what she called it. So that's an example of organizational trauma. This kind of trauma or betrayal is a root cause. And Dr. Freyd describes it as when your institution violates trust by failing to fulfill obligations to people who depend on it. Think about layoffs without warning, broken promises about job security, leadership lying about the direction of the company. So that experience leads to a variety of reactions and counteractions. The rest of the terms that I'm going to describe are all responses. Some are emotional, some are behavioral, but the responses to this organizational betrayal or trauma. So we're going to start with ambiguous grief, right? That I just mentioned is the emotional response to that kind of trauma. It's what people feel when they've lost something but can't fully process it because they're still in the environment. It's that something inside me died response, or I feel like I lost a part of myself feeling. Now, here's where it gets confusing. When people are grieving, it shows up differently. If you think about the typical Kubler-Ross model of grieving, right? We know that the typical responses to grief might include anger, bargaining, and depression before we get to acceptance. But organizational behavior shows up differently. People are going to be like bargaining, right, to get their jobs back in the same way. And it might not show up as depression in the same way. It might look like several things. Disengagement is when people psychologically withdraw. They stop contributing ideas, they stop going above and beyond, they do the bare minimum. And from an HR perspective, you see declining engagement scores. But disengagement is a symptom. It could be from grief. It could be from burnout. It could be from poor management. It could be from lack of growth opportunities. So that's what disengagement is. It is a symptom of any of those things. Let's move on to quiet quitting. I see this more recent term as just describing people who set boundaries and refuse to go above and beyond. Some people call that disengagement. I think it's often people preserving their peace and limiting how much stress they allow into their lives related to work. Sometimes it's a healthy response to an unhealthy system. Sometimes it's grief showing up as self-protection. Let's move on to low morale. Low morale is the collective emotional state when the whole team or organization feels demoralized, pessimistic, defeated. We call that low morale. Again, it's a symptom. You can have low morale for many causes, and unacknowledged grief is definitely one of them. But low morale is often kind of applied to a response across people, like within a team or group or organization. Okay, let's move on to change resistance. Change resistance is often what leaders label when people aren't enthusiastically embracing new initiatives. And maybe they're even working against it, like sabotaging or undermining the process or procrastinating implementation. It's definitely a behavioral response, right? Some of the other ones were emotional responses. This is a behavioral response, but it's not the root cause of a problem. And so sometimes what looks like resistance is actually grief. People aren't resisting the future, they are mourning the past. There's a big difference, and it requires a completely different response. I can't tell you how many times I've heard complaints from employees that they feel like leaders keep telling them it's time to move on, when the leaders never took the time to even acknowledge harm was done in the past, and that still lingers. We even see this as a nation, right? Okay, so change resistance. We want to be very careful about this one because we often see this as a root cause and target it instead of what's behind the change resistance, which is what causes change management processes and interventions to fail if you ignore or overlook or don't catch the root cause behind the change resistance and just call people resistant to change. Okay, let's look at a few more terms. Job hugging, or another term that has been used similar to job hugging, is resenteeism, which is a combination of absenteeism and resentment. It's kind of like a behavior when people cling to roles or jobs they don't love anymore or even resent being in out of survival. They can't go anywhere else. They want to go, but they can't. And you see this after rounds of layoffs. People won't speak up, they won't take risks, they won't advocate for themselves. They're worried because they are in survival mode. And I might call these silent grievers. You probably won't see many of the symptoms on the outside, though you might feel a lack of passion and energy around their work, right? Or how they engage in their work. So, final interesting one is presenteeism. Presenteeism is a behavior when people work when they're not well, like when they're dealing with physical pain, mental health issues, or burnout. Many of us work through that, right? And unfortunately, it can impair job performance and satisfaction. It can affect focus, it can affect recovery, and it could lead to more problems like absenteeism, not showing up for work, calling in sick for longer periods of time, taking a lot more FMLA. We are seeing more and more of that. It's a cascading effect. And sometimes it's just that people just keep showing up, but they really don't know how else to take care of themselves, right? So, why do these differences matter? Because when you mislabel what's happening, you implement the wrong solutions. You bring in change management consultants to address resistance when people are actually grieving. You launch engagement initiatives to fix low morale when people are experiencing institutional betrayal. You try to manage quiet quitters as a performance problem when they're actually protecting themselves from a toxic system or from chronic burnout. So none of those interventions work when people are actually grieving or experiencing a traumatic response or burned out, right? It actually makes things worse because it signals that leadership fundamentally doesn't get it. Now, there is some really good material out there already about putting in place trauma informed workplace cultures, psychological safety measures, trust building measures, right? These are important. Still, these approaches don't fully address unresolved grief. For example, you can create all the psychological safety in the world, but if people are grieving and no one acknowledges it, that grief doesn't go away, it goes underground. So, here's what I want you to sit down with this week. Here are some like reflection questions for you, okay? Number one, what, if anything, have your teams lost in recent organizational changes? Okay. Number two, what's still physically present but fundamentally changed at work? Okay. And number three, more importantly, what grief might be hiding under labels like resistance, disengagement, low morale, or quiet quitting. As always, if you would like to work with me as a coach, team or organizational consultant or workshop facilitator around these issues to help you manage these issues, definitely set up a free consultation call to learn more about my services and see if I can help. You can find out more at www.gotowerscope.com and click on the big button, top right, if you're looking at a browser, that says free consultation. Okay. I would love to chat with you more about it and see if I can help. Next week, we are diving into the 3 leadership mistakes that make workplace grief worse. That's part 2 of the series. And you've probably made all 3 at some time in your life if you've been a leader for a while and with the best of intentions. So stay tuned if you want to find out what those 3 mistakes are and how to catch yourself from doing it again and what to do instead. I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, and this is The Hard Skills. Thank you for listening.